It was 11 p.m. when I pulled into my driveway and noticed a strange BMW parked there. My upstairs shower was running, the air smelled like someone else's perfume, and right then I realized my HOA president had finally gone too far. I just hauled my suitcase up the circular drive of the colonial mansion I'd inherited, arriving home 2 weeks early from a European business trip. All I wanted was a long shower and a full night's sleep. Instead, my house was glowing like a holiday light show, music drifted from the living room, and someone was singing badly in my master bathroom. The moment I stepped inside, the scent hit me, an expensive floral perfume I'd come to associate with every whole meeting. The same cloying fragrance that followed Veronica Whitfield around like a perfume commercial gone wrong. She wasn't just tormenting me with fines and violation notices anymore. She was literally living in my house, using my shower, and acting like she owned the place. What would you do if you came home to find someone had moved in while you were away? Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and if your HOA has ever done something this outrageous. But before we get to that night, let me rewind a bit and explain how this mess started. My name's Marcus. I'm 47, and 6 months ago, I inherited something I never thought I'd own a 200-square-foot colonial mansion in Millbrook Estates. It's one of those neighborhoods where lawns are trimmed with ruler precision and neighbors communicate through passive-aggressive notes. My Aunt Dolores lived there for over 30 years. She was the kind of woman who welcomed new residents with homemade snickerdoodles and kept meticulous journals about everything. A habit that would later become my secret weapon when she passed away. She left me her beloved home fully paid off and valued at around $850,000. After my costly divorce wiped out my savings like a financial hurricane, that inheritance felt like being struck by lightning and winning the lottery at the same time. A painful, yet unbelievably lucky. When I first stepped through the door, the house smelled of lavender, old books, and that warm scent of real hardwood, the kind that tells you a home was built to last. Mornings began with the soft ticking of vintage radiators coming to life, a sound that reminded me I was finally somewhere I could call home. But paradise always has its serpent. Mine wore pearls, drove a BMW, and possessed the charm of a parking meter with a superiority complex. Her name was Veronica Whitfield, 52 years old, HOA president for 8 relentless years, a real estate agent, and the self-appointed guardian of community standards, a phrase she pronounced like it was national policy. She lived in a modest townhouse on the outer edge of our development, nice enough, but nowhere near the grand colonials of the main section, where my inheritance happened to sit. And she clearly resented that fact. I met her during my first week there. The sharp click of her heels on my front walkway was my first warning. She appeared clutching her clipboard like it was a holy artifact, looking like she'd just stepped out of Suburban Dictator Weekly. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, flashing a smile with all the warmth of an audit. "I'm here about your mailbox." Apparently, my aunt's classic black mailbox, which had proudly stood for over 30 years, didn't meet the HOA's sacred requirement for forest green. Its weathered metal told the story of thousands of letters, but nostalgia, it seemed, had no place in Millbrook's color-coded utopia. "The fine will be $150 if you don't repaint or replace it within 10 days, she declared, savoring every word like a fine wine. "But this mailbox has been here longer than I have," I protested. "Previous violations don't excuse current ones," she replied, handing me the citation with the smug satisfaction of someone convinced they'd just solved world hunger through paperwork. That was only the beginning. By week 2, I got cited for leaving my trash cans out after 6 p.m. even though collection was at 5 a.m. And I often worked late. The sound of her tires crunching on my gravel driveway became something I learned to dread, always followed by the slap of another notice being tucked under my door. By week 6, she was complaining about my teenage son Tyler's friends parking on the public street during his weekend visits. "It creates an unsightly cluster of vehicles," she said, as though a few cars were a civic disaster. By week 12, I received the piece de resistance, a threatened fine for excessive commercial activity. My cybersecurity consulting business occasionally required some equipment deliveries, but to Veronica, 3 Amazon boxes apparently meant I was running a warehouse. The pattern was glaringly obvious. Longtime residents left their trash cans out all night, painted their shutters whatever color they pleased, and threw parties that shook windows. No citations. But me, the newly divorced outsider who'd inherited a fancy home, every move I made was treated like a crime scene investigation. "She's territorial," my neighbor Beth confided one morning as we fetched our newspapers. Beth, a warm-hearted retiree in her 60s, added, "New people threaten her little kingdom, especially when they inherit houses she can't afford." When I planned my 3-week business trip to Europe, only Beth and my son Tyler knew about it, somehow. Veronica found out the evening before my departure. I heard that familiar click of heels on the walkway again. "You really shouldn't leave a house like this unattended," she said, eyes scanning my foyer like a general plotting an invasion. "I could keep an eye on things for you, thanks, but I've got it covered," I replied. Her smile vanished. "We'll see about that," she said coldly. 3 weeks later, I came home 2 weeks earlier than expected. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday when I discovered the BMW in my driveway, the shower running upstairs, and the unmistakable scent of Veronica Whitfield's perfume filling my home. The London conference had ended earlier than expected, and all I could think about was finally sleeping in my own bed. The faint scent of jet fuel still clung to my clothes as I pulled my suitcase up the familiar driveway, already picturing a steaming shower and 12 uninterrupted hours of rest. That's when I saw it, the spotless white BMW parked right in my spot. My house glowed like a Vegas casino. Every light blazed, porch lamps, windows, even the upstairs hallway. Faint music floated from inside, unmistakably coming from my living room. The crunch of fallen leaves beneath my shoes sounded unusually sharp as I approached the front door, suddenly feeling like an intruder in my own life. Instinct kicked in. I circled around to the back, finding the spare key beneath the loose brick by the garden gate, the same hiding place Aunt Dolores had always used. She used to tell me, "Front doors are for appearances. Back doors are for family." That memory made the trespass feel even worse. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me, a thick wave of expensive floral perfume that could only belong to one person. Veronica Whitfield. The same suffocating scent that haunted every hall meeting. But beneath it lingered something else, the aroma of food that wasn't mine. My granite counters were cluttered with takeout boxes, like evidence scattered at a crime scene. Dirty wine glasses filled the sink, my wine glasses, filled with wine from my own cellar. Moving through the house felt like trespassing in reverse. I kept my phone out, snapping photos as I went. Years in cybersecurity consulting had drilled certain habits into me. In my old line of work, helping divorce lawyers collect digital evidence, the first rule was always simple: document everything, assume nothing, and never let anger get ahead of proof. I photographed every detail of unfamiliar clothing tossed over my bedroom chair, new shampoo bottles lined up in the shower, prescription medication on the counter labeled V. Whitfield. Upstairs, the sound of running water mixed with what could generously be described as singing. Someone was showering in my master bathroom, and they were way too comfortable. Step by step, I climbed the stairs, each creak echoing like a warning. The bathroom door stood slightly open, steam rolling out into the hallway. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a silhouette, one that definitely wasn't mine. "Veronica," I called, my voice cutting through the steam. The singing stopped instantly. The water kept running. "Marcus," her voice cracked like thin ice. "You're not supposed to be back for another 2 weeks. It's my house, Veronica," I said evenly. "I can come back whenever I want." 5 minutes later, she emerged, dripping wet and wrapped in my bathrobe, a thick terry cloth one that still carried my cologne. Water dripped from her hair onto my hardwood floors as she stood there, guilt written all over her face. "I can explain," she stammered, clutching the robe tighter. "There was a break-in scare in the neighborhood. I was protecting your property, community service." "Really?" I gestured toward the empty wine bottle on my nightstand with $200 Bordeaux I'd been saving for a special occasion. By drinking my vintage collection and sleeping in my bed, color rushed to her cheeks, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I have HOA emergency authority over vacant homes during security incidents. It's completely within my rights. That was her first mistake. I'd spent years in digital forensics, examining forged contracts for corporate clients, and this signature had more red flags than a parade in Red Square. The pen pressure was uneven, the spacing inconsistent, and the capital M in Marcus included a decorative loop I'd never used in my life. "Nice attempt at forgery," I said, pulling out my phone to start recording. "But analyzing documents happens to be my line of work." That's when a toilet flushed in the guest bathroom, and my night went from bizarre to completely unhinged. Out stepped Officer Dave Kowalski, wearing his full police uniform. Not just any cop, the same married father of 3 who lived 2 streets away and coached Little League on weekends. The friendly guy who flipped burgers at neighborhood barbecues. "Everything all right here, Veronica?" Dave asked, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun, like this was some routine domestic disturbance. That's when everything snapped into place, the way tumblers fall in a lock. This wasn't just trespassing. This was coordinated fraud, complete with law enforcement cover. Veronica hadn't just been squatting in my home, she was running some kind of operation, and Dave was helping her do it. "Dave," I said evenly, keeping my voice calm. "You realize you're standing in my house without permission, right? Off duty, still in uniform, with a woman who's been illegally living here while I was overseas." His confidence vanished in seconds. "She told me you'd given her permission to house sit," he said weakly. "Did I give you permission to be here?" I countered. The silence between us tightened like a pulled wire. "Because this entire exchange is being recorded," I added, lifting my phone slightly. "And something tells me your department frowns on officers getting involved in civil disputes, especially ones that might involve fraud." Veronica's complexion drained from red to pale gray, like spoiled mayonnaise. "You can't prove anything illegal happened here," she snapped. I smiled for the first time since stepping into this nightmare. "Actually," I said, "I can." The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in 3 weeks, though woke up was generous. I'd barely slept. Every creak in the floorboards made me wonder if Veronica had made spare copies of my keys. First order of business, call a locksmith. Second, start uncovering just how deep this rabbit hole went. While I waited for the locks to be replaced, I moved through my house like a crime scene investigator. The garage told its own story. My tools had been used and returned to the wrong spots, oil stains marked where another car had parked. And my workbench had been turned into what looked like a project staging area. Not for my projects, that's for sure. Around 10 a.m., there was a knock at the door. My neighbor Beth stood there, holding a casserole and wearing an expression that screamed, "I know something." "I was wondering when you'd find out," she said, settling into a kitchen chair like she was about to share state secrets. "Veronica told everyone you were subletting the place to her temporarily. Said you needed the extra money after your divorce." The betrayal burned onto levels personal and financial. She hadn't just stolen my home, she'd stolen my name and twisted my reputation. "She threw a dinner party here last Thursday," Beth continued. 8 people. Catered food. Acted like this was her house. I thought it was odd, but she had an answer for everything. Then came the kicker, my security system. I discovered it hadn't just been turned off, it had been expertly bypassed. Not cut wires, not brute force, but professional level work. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. I'd installed that system myself after my divorce, partly for protection, partly as a distraction. Seeing it surgically dismantled felt like waking up to find stitches you didn't remember getting. By noon, Veronica launched her first counterattack. A crisp HOA notice appeared taped to my front door, summoning me to an emergency board meeting that same evening. Technically legal, a 24 hours notice was all they needed under the bylaws, but just barely. The accusations read like bad courtroom drama, disturbing the peace, harassment of board members, and my personal favorite, threatening behavior toward community officials. The meeting took place at the community center, a beige box that smelled like old carpet and disappointment. 5 board members sat behind a folding table that looked more appropriate for a bake sale than a disciplinary hearing. Veronica sat in the middle, wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than my first car. From the moment I walked in, it was obvious the outcome had been decided hours ago. 3 board members were current clients of Veronique's real estate firm, a fact I'd uncovered during my late-night research. The 4th was her cousin, Jeanne, who had the intellectual depth of a decorative pumpkin. Only one person, elderly Gladys Pembroke, looked remotely uneasy about the whole charade. "Marcus," Veronica began, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "we've received some disturbing reports about your behavior last night. Witnesses described you as aggressive and threatening." "Witnesses?" I asked, scanning the room. "Not one of them had been in my house. Officer Kowalski has provided a full statement," she said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "Dave's report portrayed me as a deranged homeowner who'd burst into his own house and threatened a well-meaning community volunteer. The creative spin was almost impressive. He'd managed to make breaking and entering sound like public service. They gave me 3 minutes, exactly 3, to defend myself in what was essentially a kangaroo court. 3 minutes to explain why finding strangers living in my home might have made me a little agitated. "I'd like to review the board minutes authorizing this so-called emergency caretaker program," I said. Veronica shuffled through her stack of papers as if trying to stall. "That's an administrative matter, and I'd like to see the bylaw that gives the HOA authority to occupy private homes," I pressed. More paper shuffling. "The board has broad emergency powers," she replied stiffly. "Could you cite the specific bylaw number?" The silence that followed was longer than a budget meeting. Finally, Cousin Jana piped up. "We don't have to justify our authority to you." That was the moment it all clicked. This wasn't about policy, procedure, or community rules. It was about power, plain and simple. Years in corporate consulting had taught me one hard truth: bullies thrive when their victims stay quiet, too intimidated or too uninformed to fight back. They count on you not knowing your rights or not being able to afford to defend them. The final vote was 4-1. Verdict: I was fined $1,500 for harassment of community officials. Gladys was the only one who disagreed, bless her soul. The board also slapped me with a $500 monthly monitoring fee until I could prove I was in line with community standards, whatever that was supposed to mean. As I walked out of the meeting, Gladys hurried to catch up with me in the parking lot. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke, normally comforting, but tonight it felt foreboding. "She's pulled this stunt before," Gladys whispered, glancing around as if we were plotting a jailbreak. "The whole vacant house thing. The last people she targeted just moved away instead of fighting." Her words hit me like a cold downpour, but for the first time, I had confirmation that this wasn't just about me. That following Monday, I marched into the office of Sarah Morgan, Esquire, lugging a banker's box overflowing with documents and a level of determination that probably registered on a Richter scale. Sarah specialized in property law and HOA abuse, a niche that sadly had more demand than anyone liked to admit. Her office radiated sharp professionalism, the smell of leather, polished wood, and confidence. Diplomas lined one wall like the trophies of past legal battles. "Let me guess," she said after hearing my story. "They're claiming emergency powers that don't exist anywhere." "Your bylaws." Her first discovery sent my blood pressure soaring. The HOA's so-called emergency caretaker authority was pure fiction. After just 15 minutes reviewing the governing documents, Sarah confirmed there were no provisions whatsoever for emergency oversight, temporary caretaking, or anything that would justify Veronica squatting in my home. Her second finding was even more damning: the board had never approved such powers. No meeting minutes, no votes, no records of any kind. The authority Veronica waved around was as real as a unicorn, just far more lucrative. But the third discovery deserved to be framed. For 3 years, Veronica had been collecting monitoring fees from homeowners without any legal justification whatsoever. She had effectively been running a protection racket, only with clipboards and HOA stationery. While Sarah worked the legal angles, Veronica launched her own counterattack about as subtle as a hand grenade. By Tuesday morning, an anonymous complaint landed on the city building inspector's desk, accusing me of running an unpermitted commercial space from my home office. The inspector showed up while I was at a client meeting, but my newly reinstalled security cameras concealed better than CIA surveillance gear recorded. Every second. He spent 20 minutes touring my property with someone who clearly knew it inside and out, pointing out my office windows and even where my electrical wiring ran. Naturally, the inspector found nothing wrong because there was nothing to find. But as he left, he mentioned to my neighbor, Beth, that whoever filed the report knew my home's interior layout in suspicious detail. Gee, I wonder who that could be. Wednesday brought another anonymous tip, this time claiming I was violating zoning laws by operating a business from a residential address. Again, the informant had an eerie familiarity with my workspace setup, right down to what equipment I owned and where I kept it. Then came Thursday's smear campaign. Posts started popping up on Nextdoor accusing me of being a disruptive new resident causing trouble for long-time homeowners. The rumor mill cranked into overdrive, painting me as everything from a tax cheat to someone hiding assets from a divorce. Even my teenage son, Tyler, came home asking why the neighbors were interrogating him about whether I was in legal trouble. By Friday, the intimidation escalated. Suddenly, police patrol cars began creeping down my street with the frequency of pizza deliveries on Super Bowl Sunday. They slowed in front of my house, paused, sometimes even lingered just long enough to send a clear message, "We're watching you." But Saturday was the turning point. That's when I dropped the digital nuke. Thanks to my cybersecurity background, I knew that most people delete files like they throw away old newspapers. They think they're gone, but they're just buried. Veronica had been careful not to use my main computer directly, but she hadn't accounted for cloud backups and automatic syncing. My recovered security footage told a story worthy of a crime thriller. 10 days of recordings showed Veronica entering and leaving my home at will, hosting guests, giving what looked like real estate tours, lounging by my pool, cooking in my kitchen, even hosting small dinner parties in my dining room. But the most incriminating clip was her photographing every room using professional lighting gear like she was building a listing portfolio. And the digital smoking gun. Hidden in my computer's temporary files were traces of failed login attempts from her phone cache data showing she'd connected to my Wi-Fi and tried to access my personal and financial files. She failed, thanks to encryption, but the digital fingerprints were there, tied directly to her phone's MAC address. Sarah's response to the evidence was music to my ears. "We're going to destroy her in court." By Sunday, the neighborhood dynamic had shifted. Beth invited several residents for coffee in her backyard, supposedly to discuss community issues. 8 households showed up, and by the end of 2 hours, we had pieced together a pattern of corruption and intimidation stretching back years. Mrs. Peterson from Maple Street had paid $800 in fake landscaping fees. The Johnsons had been coerced into using Veronica as their realtor. Even quiet Mr. Williams confessed he'd received citations for violations others committed without consequence. That backyard coffee meeting ended with something I hadn't felt in weeks: unity. For once, Gladys stood alone in dissent, bless her heart. The board also tacked on a $500 monthly monitoring fee until I could prove I was adhering to their vague community standards. As I left the meeting, Gladys caught up with me in the parking lot. The autumn air smelled faintly of wood smoke, usually comforting, but that evening it felt menacing. "She's done this before," Gladys murmured, glancing around like we were plotting an escape. "She targets vacant houses. People usually just move away instead of fighting her." Her words landed like cold rain. But they also gave me something I hadn't had before: confirmation this wasn't only about me. Monday morning changed everything. At 8 a.m., Sarah Morgan called with the excited yet clinical tone lawyers get when they've uncovered something big. "Marcus, we've got a court order for the HOA's financial records. You need to see this now." I drove over in my pajama shirt, clutching a travel mug like it was life-saving. Sarah's conference table was covered in spreadsheets, her face mixed triumph with disgust. "Veronic's been busy," she said, pointing at highlighted entries. "We found $47,000 paid to vendors that don't exist." The scheme was elegantly simple: invoices for emergency roof repairs during storms that never occurred, tree removals for trees still standing, parking lot maintenance for lots untouched for years. Every invoice looked professional, and every amount was just below the threshold requiring board approval. That's where my cybersecurity skills came in handy. While Sarah worked the legal side, I followed the digital money trail. Every fake vendor check had been deposited into accounts tied to Whitfield Property Solutions LLC, a shell company that existed only on paper and in Veronic's bank records. "She's been systematically stealing from the community," I said as the totals climbed on the spreadsheet. "And there's more." Sarah then showed me the file that pulled it all together. Hidden among papers in my home office, pages Veronica had clearly rifled through was her business plan for Whitfield Premium Property Management. It read like a criminal blueprint disguised as a corporate prospectus, used temporarily vacant luxury homes as stage showcase properties for wealthy buyers, in short. She hadn't been squatting out of convenience. She'd been running a calculated scam, using my inherited mansion as a showroom to impress high-end clients. The dinner parties, the professional photos, the tours for potential buyers, all part of a scheme to present herself as the manager of luxury properties she didn't own. Worse, an email chain between Veronica and a group named Elite Estates Management revealed they'd been splitting profits from unauthorized use of vacant homes across 3 counties. My place wasn't a one-off, it was a pattern, her most ambitious target. Then came the shocker. In her files we found a pre-filled purchase agreement listing my address at a sale price $200. Zero below market value. She was preparing a paper trail to seize control of my house through some bogus emergency lien or administrative maneuver, essentially attempting to steal my inheritance with forged paperwork. Beth's background in forensic accounting, something she'd downplayed at our neighborhood meetings, turned out to be priceless. She'd spent her career chasing corporate fraud. And Veronic's methods were textbook embezzlement and property fraud across the communities. "It's more than $200,000, Beth said that evening as we spread documents across my kitchen like evidence for a tribunal. She's been targeting vacant properties, elderly owners, and anyone too scared to fight back." The scale was staggering. 6 different HOA communities, dozens of victims, and years of organized theft. This wasn't merely about someone squatting in my house. It was about dismantling an entire criminal operation disguised as community stewardship. That night, sitting in my reclaimed living room, the pattern snapped into focus. Veronica wasn't merely an overzealous HOA tyrant, she was a professional con artist who monetized intimidation. The invasion of my home felt less like a random attack and more like a calculated hit. My inherited house was the perfect target: high value, vulnerable owner, newly divorced man. Short on local knowledge, away on business. But she'd misjudged one crucial thing: she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. I had the technical know-how to trace digital footprints, the financial means to pursue legal action, and the stubbornness to see it through. As I locked my newly secured front door that night, I realized the real fight was only beginning. We hadn't only uncovered fraud, we'd exposed a conspiracy that extended well beyond my violated sanctuary. Tomorrow, we would start tearing it apart, piece by piece. By Tuesday morning, my kitchen had become a war room. Sarah arrived with legal briefs, Beth brought her forensic accounting tools, and I contributed enough coffee to fuel a small army. The air smelled of determination and highlighter ink as we mapped a multi-front attack on Veronic's enterprise. Sarah laid out the legal plan like a general preparing for D-Day: civil lawsuit first, trespass claims next, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, defamation. Each accusation carried its own weight, specific penalties, yes, but more importantly, a key advantage: civil discovery. That meant Veronica would be legally compelled to hand over documents she'd rather keep buried deeper than Jimmy Hoffa. "The FBI's interested," Sarah said, sliding a business card across my granite counter. "Financial Crimes Division wants to discuss the mail fraud aspect. Every bogus HOA letter she sent qualifies as federal mail fraud, and that's serious prison time." The State Real Estate Board had also taken notice, eager to investigate her for unlicensed property management and the misuse of client data. Apparently, turning someone else's home into your personal showroom breaks around 17 professional regulations. This forensic accounting had uncovered the smoking gun: detailed financial ledgers showing exactly how HOA funds were siphoned into Veronic's personal accounts, years of fabricated invoices, non-existent vendors, and fake emergency repairs that never took place. The trail was so clean it practically led to her doorstep with GPS precision. "Here's something most people don't realize about HOA law," Sarah said, highlighting passages in our community bylaws. Emergency powers must be explicitly stated in writing. Any fine over $100 requires a unanimous board vote, and every board member must disclose financial conflicts or face personal liability. That last part changed everything. Every fine Veronica had issued without proper approval was legally void. Every decision made while concealing her real estate interests exposed her to personal lawsuits. Every dollar she'd pocketed under false pretenses amounted to theft, plain and simple. While Sarah handled the legal artillery, Beth and I focused on community engagement. We organized a homeowner rights workshop at the public library, framing it as educational rather than confrontational. The goal wasn't revenge, it was awareness. We wanted neighbors to understand how to spot HOA abuse without turning it into a witch hunt. 23 residents attended, drawn by curiosity and word of mouth. What surfaced was both heartbreaking and infuriating. 18 families had been victimized over the past 4 years. Mrs. Morgan from Oak Street had paid $2,200 in emergency landscaping fees for work that was never performed. The Rodriguez family had received 17 violations for actions identical to those other neighbors committed without consequence, even tough. No-nonsense contractor Bill Morrison admitted he'd paid fraudulent fines rather than waste time fighting HOA politics. The pattern was unmistakable. Veronica had systematically targeted people who couldn't or wouldn't push back: new residents, elderly homeowners, single parents, those with language barriers, or anyone too distracted by life to resist. By the end of that meeting, we'd gained something more powerful than evidence: a united community demanding accountability. The technical legwork became my department. Every affected homeowner received a simple documentation kit: dates, amounts, witnesses, photos, and all related correspondence. My cybersecurity experience proved invaluable for structuring digital evidence and creating encrypted backups even the NSA would envy. We built a secure, encrypted group chat, partly for safety, partly to give everyone the feeling of belonging to a movement. And in truth, that's exactly what we'd become: the quiet resistance. The media strategy required precision. From my consulting days, I knew journalists prefer complete narratives, not scattered fragments. Local TV thrives on stories of authority figures abusing power, especially when there's video proof and sympathetic victims. Meanwhile, Sarah filed a motion to freeze Veronica's assets before she could move or conceal the stolen funds. The process was complex, but the principle simple: you can't profit from crime while the crime is under investigation. At the same time, I started cataloging everything with an eye toward a possible documentary. The story had every hook: corruption, power abuse, ordinary people standing up to a broken system, and enough evidence to fill an archive. But our most effective weapon turned out to be psychological pressure. I began attending every whole meeting, always calm, always polite, with Sarah by my side. I requested detailed financial justifications for every motion and expense. Could you explain the vendor selection process? I'd ask, where are the receipts for this emergency repair? What documentation supports this fee structure? Each question was reasonable and completely within my rights, and each one made Veronica visibly sweat. Every answer she avoided was an admission she couldn't afford to make. By Friday, we were ready. Legal filings were submitted. Federal investigators were briefed. Media outlets were prepped. The neighborhood was mobilized. Veronica had built her empire on fear and ignorance. But we were about to show her that knowledge and unity were far stronger weapons. Her counterattack came fast, desperate, and predictable. By Monday, she'd filed a restraining order against me, claiming harassment, stalking, and threats. The complaint read like a bad novel, complete with fabricated stories of me driving past her house and intimidating her clients. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who'd illegally occupied my home was now accusing me of stalking her. The hearing was set for Thursday morning at the county courthouse, a building that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. Veronica arrived with a bargain bin attorney who looked like he'd earned his degree from a cereal box, while I showed up with Sarah Morgan and a banker's box full of evidence that could bury a small government. Judge Patricia Morrison, with her sharp gaze and no excuses energy, presided. She listened to Veronica's teary monologue about feeling threatened and unsafe with saint-like patience and the skepticism of a veteran judge. Mr. Reed has been deliberately intimidating me at board meetings, Veronica sniffled, dabbing at phantom tears. He follows me around the neighborhood, watches my house, and makes menacing remarks about my business. Her performance could have earned her an Oscar at perfectly timed pauses, trembling voice, and just enough dramatics to seem believable. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have almost felt sorry for her. Then Sarah stood up, holding our meticulously organized timeline and the security footage that was about to change everything. Your Honor, we have evidence confirming that Mr. Reed has never been within 500 feet of Ms. Whitfield's home, Sarah stated confidently, sliding printed screenshots from multiple security cameras across the desk. Each timestamp directly corresponds with the dates she alleges he was stalking her. The footage was devastating. While Veronica insisted I had been lurking outside her house on Tuesday night, my security system clearly showed me hosting Tyler's study group in our kitchen. On the day she claimed I'd confronted her at the grocery store, credit card records placed me 50 miles away meeting a client. But Sarah's final move was the knockout punch: audio recordings from HOA board meetings. Ms. Whitfield asserts that Mr. Reed behaved aggressively and made threats, Sarah told the judge. These recordings from public meetings reveal quite the opposite. The audio was almost painfully polite. Every question I asked was calm, measured, and entirely appropriate. Every remark was professional to the point of monotony. Meanwhile, Veronica's voice grew sharper and more defensive each time I requested standard financial documentation. Judge Morrison's expression gradually shifted from neutral patience to mild irritation. Ms. Whitfield, she asked, do you have any evidence besides your own statement to support these stalking claims? Veronica's attorney scrambled to submit a written statement from Dave, who backed her accusations about my alleged aggressive behavior, but Sarah was already prepared. Your Honor, Officer Kowalski was present in Mr. Reed's home without authorization when this supposed incident took place. His statement conveniently omits that he was there as Miss Whitfield's guest, not in any official capacity. The judge denied the restraining order with the weary exasperation of someone who'd seen one too many frivolous cases. She even warned Veronica about the consequences of filing false claims, a moment that felt like an early Christmas gift wrapped in case law. Yet Veronica's desperation only deepened. What followed was a coordinated smear campaign that could have been pulled straight from a political playbook. Anonymous tips began circulating among my business clients, claiming I was under federal investigation for fraud. Fake online reviews appeared on my company's website, accusing me of everything from incompetence to criminal conduct. Then she crossed a line. She went after my son. Tyler came home visibly shaken after someone called his school, claiming he was being neglected and left alone during my business trips. Thankfully, the school counselor, who'd known us for years, immediately recognized the lie. Still, seeing my kid distressed over such nonsense was infuriating. A few days later, Child Services came knocking. A serious-looking social worker named Jana Rodriguez arrived at my door one Wednesday evening, clipboard in hand and concern written all over her face. Someone had reported that I was often away for work, leaving my teenage son unsupervised for long stretches. The accusation was absurd. Tyler was 17, an honor roll student, varsity soccer player, and more responsible than most adults I knew. Still, I cooperated fully, showing documentation of my parenting schedule, emergency contacts, and Tyler's academic records. Ms. Rodriguez spent over an hour interviewing us, inspecting our home, and reviewing our family situation. Her final report not only dismissed the claim but commended our household's stability and Tyler's maturity. The false report had backfired beautifully, leaving an official record of Veronica's harassment while proving just how solid our family really was. Tyler, ever the calm realist, laughed it off later that night as we ordered pizza to celebrate. "She really thinks fake complaints are going to scare us," he said, shaking his head. "She's got rumors, we've got proof. Smart kid." He'd inherited his aunt's sharp sense of logic along with her house. But while we were savoring that small victory, Veronica was gearing up for her most reckless move yet, one that would threaten to drag down the entire neighborhood association with her. Her final act of desperation unfolded like a slow-motion disaster film, with the legal pressure mounting and the community finally seeing through her deception. She decided to obliterate everything rather than face justice. It began with a conveniently timed computer crash. "I'm so sorry," she announced during the emergency board meeting she'd hastily called that Tuesday evening. "Our financial records have been completely wiped. My system crashed over the weekend and unfortunately, our backups failed too." The excuse was as believable as someone winning the lottery with next week's numbers. Just days before the court-ordered financial audit, every digital record of HOA transactions had somehow disappeared into the virtual void. What Veronica didn't count on were two things: my cybersecurity background and the simple truth that in the digital world, deleted never truly means gone. While she performed her tragic tech theater routine for the remaining board members, I was already working with a data recovery expert who owed me a favor from an old corporate case. The beauty of modern systems is that they rarely erase data completely, they just bury it. Within 48 hours, we had recovered 87% of the lost financial records from her hard drive, including a browser history showing she'd searched for how to permanently delete files and data destruction software the morning before her so-called crash. The recovered documents revealed everything: email threads with fake vendors, detailed blueprints for property takeovers, and spreadsheets ranking which homeowners were easiest to exploit. It was organized crime disguised as whole management, but the real smoking gun was an unsent email draft complaining about that cybersecurity guy who thinks he's so smart. In it, she detailed her plan to destroy all evidence so no one could ever prove anything. As I was piecing together her digital footprint, Veronica was busy launching her final offensive. She convened a special board meeting, proposing an emergency assessment of $15,000 per household to cover unexpected maintenance and legal costs. If approved, it would have financially crushed half the senior residents and forced younger families to choose between paying their mortgage or the HOA's new fees. Her pitch to the few remaining loyal board members was masterfully manipulative, the last con of a cornered fraudster. Marcus Reed's frivolous lawsuit is draining our community of thousands in legal expenses. Every homeowner should share the cost of the damage his harassment has caused. That was Veronica's latest manipulation, trying to shift the financial burden of her own wrongdoing onto everyone else, while painting herself as the victim of my so-called wealthy newcomer privilege. She scheduled the meeting for Friday evening, giving barely any notice and applying maximum pressure. But this time, our community network was ready. 43 homeowners showed up, a record turnout that packed the community center wall to wall. The air was thick with tension and the scent of Beth's homemade cookies, which she'd brought with the practical wisdom that confronting corruption always goes better on a full stomach. Then, in a moment that felt straight out of a courtroom drama, elderly Gladys Pembroke, who had once defended Veronica, rose from her chair, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I move to remove Veronica Whitfield from the board for financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty." The vote that followed was swift and decisive, 4-1 in favor of her removal, with only her cousin Jana casting the lone dissenting vote. 10 minutes later, Jana herself was voted off the board for failing to act on obvious financial irregularities. But Veronica's downfall wasn't complete just yet. As she gathered her papers and prepared to storm out, the community center doors opened and in walked FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, radiating the kind of authority that makes guilty people confess before a word is spoken. "Ms. Whitfield," Agent Santos announced, her voice firm and echoing through the silent room, "we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of mail fraud, conspiracy, and violations of federal wire fraud statutes." The metallic snap of the handcuffs was the sound of justice finally catching up. As the agents led her away, Veronica made one last desperate attempt to preserve her victim narrative. "This is all because of him," she shouted, pointing at me. "He's destroyed our community with his lies and vindictive lawsuits." Not a single person responded. The 43 homeowners stood silent as the FBI escorted her to an unmarked sedan. The only sound was the autumn wind rustling through the old oak trees that had watched over our neighborhood long before Veronica's reign of intimidation began. From the back row, Tyler looked up from his calculus homework and said dryly, "Well, that was dramatic." It was the understatement of the year delivered with the deadpan humor he'd inherited from his at Aunt Dolores. After the meeting, neighbors lingered in the parking lot longer than usual, savoring the rare feeling of collective vindication. Beth suggested an impromptu potluck for the coming weekend to celebrate new beginnings, and for the first time in months, people seemed genuinely excited about community events again. But as gratifying as Veronica's arrest was, the real victory came afterward. The neighborhood she had divided through fear and manipulation began to rebuild itself stronger, more united, and determined never to be deceived again. 3 weeks later, the Millbrook Estates scandal had grown far beyond a neighborhood issue. It had become a full-fledged municipal controversy. The city council convened a special session to discuss HOA reform legislation, and the packed auditorium buzzed with the energy of a political revolution, albeit one conducted under fluorescent lights, name tags, and strict adherence to Robert's Rules of Order. Every seat was filled with residents, reporters, city officials, and curious spectators who had followed the saga through local news. The air smelled of anticipation and the faint bitterness of government-issued coffee. I was scheduled to testify about the urgent need for stronger HOA oversight laws, but, true to form, Veronica had other plans. Out on bail and facing multiple federal charges, she somehow convinced a slick attorney, one who looked like he billed by the syllable, to let her make a final public appearance. Her strategy was straight from the narcissist's handbook: cast herself as the innocent victim of a wealthy outsider's personal vendetta. Taking the podium in a navy dress that probably cost more than most monthly mortgages, she launched into a performance worthy of a streaming docuseries. "I've dedicated 8 years of my life to serving this community," she began, voice trembling with carefully rehearsed sincerity. "I've volunteered countless hours, protected property values, and upheld the standards that make Millbrook Estates one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city." At first, the audience was quiet, some even appeared sympathetic. Veronica had always known how to work a crowd, and this was her magnum opus. "Now," she continued, voice rising, "I'm being targeted by a vindictive newcomer who couldn't accept reasonable community rules. Marcus Reed has used his wealth and influence to destroy my reputation, my business, and my life, all over simple misunderstandings about property management." Several attendees nodded along. Her performance was convincing if you didn't know the truth. She had always been gifted at repackaging fraud as public service. Then she made the fatal mistake that shattered her illusion. "I have never done anything illegal or unethical," she declared, her tone righteous and defiant. "Every decision I made was to protect our community's best interests and preserve property values. That was my cue." "Before we move on," I said, standing up and asking the moderator for permission to present evidence, "I think everyone deserves to see what Ms. Whitfield's version of property protection really looked like." I walked to the front of the room, laptop in hand, and connected it to the projector. The first video appeared on the big screen: security footage of Veronica hosting a lavish dinner party inside my dining room, complete with catering staff and what looked like potential real estate clients touring my home. The room went silent except for the audio from my security feed, Veronica's voice bragging about managing this gorgeous property and praising the exclusivity of our luxury community. Next came footage of her rummaging through my home office, photographing my personal documents. Then another clip showing her instructing Dave on how to intimidate homeowners who asked too many questions about fines and fees. Finally, I played the knockout blow, an audio file recovered from her supposedly crashed computer: Veronica laughing on the phone about that divorced guy who thinks he's so smart, while discussing her plan to use vacant homes as showpieces for her real estate business. The audience's mood flipped instantly. Sympathy curdled into outrage, murmurs grew into angry whispers, and soon, Open disgust filled the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, advancing to the next slide, which displayed a detailed financial chart. "This is $89,000 in documented fraud across multiple HOA communities, phony vendors, fake emergency repairs, and service fees for work that never happened." At that moment, Detective Lisa Warren, seated in the third row, rose to address the audience. "Ms. Whitfield," she said firmly, "is currently under federal indictment for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. The FBI investigation has identified victims across 6 different HOA communities." And just like that, the illusion was gone. Veronica's attorney tried desperately to contain the fallout, but no amount of legal spin could erase what everyone had seen or heard. The evidence spoke louder than any defense. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Curiosity gave way to anger, and even her most loyal allies looked as though they'd been personally deceived. City Councilman Robert Morgan stepped up to the microphone, his tone that of a man far too familiar with municipal scandals. "The legislation before us today," he announced, "will mandate quarterly financial audits for all HOA boards, require full disclosure of conflicts of interest, and enforce criminal background checks for all community management positions." The vote was unanimous, 7-0, approving the most sweeping HOA reform bill in county history. But the real turning point came when elderly Mrs. Peterson, who had once paid $800 in fraudulent fees she could barely afford, rose from the back row. "I want to thank Marcus Reed," she said, her trembling voice carrying through the hushed auditorium, "for having the courage to stand up when the rest of us were too frightened or too exhausted to fight." The audience erupted into a standing ovation that lasted a full 3 minutes. A moment that felt like redemption. For every sleepless night I'd questioned whether the fight had been worth it. As we exited the hall, Tyler nudged me with a grin. "Dad," he said, "Aunt Dolores would be proud." He was right. She would have loved seeing justice served, and documented so thoroughly. 6 months later, justice arrived with the precision of a Swiss clock and the satisfaction of a storybook ending. Veronica pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have revealed even more victims and co-conspirators. The federal judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and ordered $127.00 in restitution to all identified victims. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and she was banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. Dave Kowalski wasn't spared either of 6 months in county jail, loss of his police pension, and a lifetime ban from law enforcement. Watching a corrupt cop face justice felt like spotting a unicorn in your backyard, rare, surreal, and deeply satisfying. The civil lawsuit concluded with an additional $45,000 in punitive damages, which we used to establish the Millbrook Estates Good Neighbor Fund, a community initiative that assists families with emergency home repairs, medical bills, and temporary hardships. Our newly elected HOA board, which somehow ended up with me as treasurer despite my protests, implemented a level of transparency that could make an auditor tear up with joy. Monthly financial statements, open bidding for all contracts, and quarterly meetings where neighbors actually discussed real issues like reasonable adults. Home values in Millbrook Estates climbed higher than ever, not just because of improved management, but because buyers genuinely preferred communities that practiced openness over intimidation. Turns out, people value integrity more than control. What surprised me most, though, was the sense of personal healing. My home, once tainted by intrusion and corruption, began to feel like mine again. That autumn, Tyler and I hosted our first backyard barbecue. Over 60 neighbors showed up. The sound of kids laughing on the swing set I'd installed in the spot where Veronica once parked her unauthorized BMW felt like poetic justice. But the ripple effects reached far beyond our neighborhood. Marcus' Law, officially titled the Homeowner Protection and Transparency Act, became a model for other states, adopted in 3 within a year. It required clear financial reporting, disclosure of conflicts of interest, and formalized the process for contesting HOA decisions. Soon, I found myself testifying before the state legislature, speaking at homeowner rights conferences, and advising communities tackling their own HOA corruption. Even my cybersecurity business flourished. Clients admired my disciplined, evidence-driven approach to rooting out fraud. Then came the documentary, When HOA Letters Go Rogue, One Man's Fight for Justice, which premiered at the local film festival and won the Audience Choice Award. Tyler was thrilled to see himself on screen, maybe even more than when he got accepted into his dream college, which says everything you need to know about teenage priorities. The true victory, though, was what we built afterward. Beth launched annual community rights workshops, teaching residents about property law, HOA governance, and spotting abuse of power. We started a neighborhood newsletter filled with useful updates instead of citations. The Homeowner Legal Defense Scholarship we founded now funds law students who provide free legal aid to families fighting home misconduct. Last year alone, they helped 12 households recover more than $30,000 in fraudulent fines. 2 years after Veronitza's arrest, our annual block party had transformed from an awkward obligation into a joyful tradition. Over 100 people attended this year, including families once targeted by Veronica in other neighborhoods. As I watched old neighbors and new friends mingle in my backyard, laughter replacing whispers of fear, I thought about something Aunt Dolores used to say. This house was meant to bring people together. She'd been right, just not in the way any of us imagined. The scent of grilling burgers blended with Beth's apple pie as Tyler and his friends laughed near the volleyball net, the same one we set up in the garden for the first time since inheriting this home. It finally felt like the sanctuary my aunt intended it to be. If your HOA has ever tried to pull something shady, share your experience in the comments. You'd be surprised how many people think they're powerless when they're not. Remember, you have more rights than you realize. And bullies lose their power when confronted by informed, united resistance. Hit subscribe if you want to hear how we helped 3 more families take down corrupt HOA letters this year. Next week's story: the city council member who tried to shut down a veteran's food truck with fake violations only to find he'd been collecting evidence for 6 months. Documentation beats intimidation every single time. From all of us at HOA Stories, thank you for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed watching Justice Prevail and Karma Catch Up, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of HOA drama.